love people. It's the AC Podcast. For the love of God, love people.
Hi, my name is Andy Steiger, and I'm joined today by my friend Les Talvio. It's good to be with you.
I'm thrilled to be here with you and look forward to our conversation.
Today we're going to be talking about your story, and I'm guessing you're probably a little nervous.
A bit, yeah.
Now, I find this really interesting, Les, because you contacted me and said, listen, Andy, I've never shared my story before. Do I have that right? You've never shared your kind of life story.
Yeah, people know bits and pieces of my life story. I've shared my life story in a third party before, but also with limited information. Yeah.
I did notice that because you wrote down your story to start and you sent that over to me, and I noticed that you had written it in the third person. It was very much removed, right? Like, this is something that happened to that person. Did you do that because it's a painful story?
If in the first person, it is a painful story. It was a way for me to not be dwelling on it and reliving the pain and experiences that I went through.
Now, we're going to get into this as we get deeper, but I just wanted to ask, as I saw and I read your story, was your impetus to put it in the third person also because there's some shame there?
There was shame there, and I think the reason why I can share my story now is because I don't have any shame being held over me, and it was me that was really holding it over myself. But yeah,
I think that's an important aspect of the story, right? Is how do you get over that shame? And I just wanted to, first of all, just say thanks for entrusting me with the opportunity to talk to you as you share your story and to interview you on this, and for your willingness to share this story, because I know that there are many people that will be impacted by it and that you could encourage through it. Now, those people who perhaps don't know you, Les, I think it'd be helpful just to give people a little bit of background of, the part that, that most people know you for as the co-founder and the executive director of Cyrus Centre. But they haven't heard the story part. So they're going to get to hear the story part in a moment, but bring people up to speed who perhaps don't know about Cyrus Centre, what the work is that you do.
yeah. So Cyrus Centre is a ministry for homeless youth who are in the Fraser Valley, youth that are affected by poverty, addiction, mental health. Many of the youth that come to us might come at dinner time and have a meal that's provided by the community, and that meal would be the starting point of them exiting the streets. We have shelter services for youth. We have the only shelter services for youth between Metro Vancouver and the Okanagan. So it's really it's a huge area that we're in the middle. So we have a location in Abbotsford and a location in Chilliwack that mirror each other as far as the services that are provided, with a resource center, where basic needs are being met every day with trusted adults. And it's really important to know that when Cyrus sent, before our doors were opened, Abbotsford and the Fraser Valley went through their very first homeless count in 2004. And part of the homeless count that was done then was really comprehensive in that they did focus groups with people on the streets, including youth. And there were so many youth to speak to that they had to do 2 focus groups. Wow. And they asked the youth the questions, what their experiences were on the streets, why they were on the streets, and what they saw as their top 5 needs. Now, I had the privilege, because where I was working at the time, to be able to sit in on these focus groups and to be there and hear it. And before they rattled it off, I rattled off the 5 top things that they need in my head. But then the youth spoke, and it didn't line up with what I was thinking. And it was really interesting to hear from them directly. But the youth wanted a place where they can have something to eat. It was, at the time, the only place in Abbotsford that a youth can get something to eat when home wasn't an option, was at the Sikh temple. Then they wanted a place where they could access showers and laundry facilities. And again, they gave reasons like, how are we supposed to go to school or look for a job or look for a place to live if we're dirty, we smell, we're unpresentable. They wanted a place that, this didn't even make my list at all, was a place where they could talk to adults, safe adults, that weren't going to judge them because of the way they look or smell or talk or anything, and not just tell them what they need to do, but actually would sit down and listen to them so they could share their story. And then fifth on their list was a place to stay, have a safe bed that they could stay, because many of these youth were being exploited to meet those basic needs that they talked about. They were having to give of themselves for a cheeseburger or a place to sleep, a place to have a shower. After that, the report came out, and one of the recommendations in their report was a storefront location that was available 24/7 for youth. And no one was doing it in the community. Nobody was doing that specifically in the Fraser Valley at all. And my colleague and I, we approached some churches and we spoke to the ministerial here in Abbotsford about the need. And we, right off the bat, said this needs to be a ministry of the church, not a ministry of a church. We had some great conversations with Northview right at the beginning. Northview was like, hey, we want to be a part of this. So many churches, Hill City, Seven Oaks Alliance, Peace Lutheran, all these churches, Transform Central, although they had a different name back then, came to the table and said, yeah, we want to see this happen. And in less than 1 year, it was open. The doors actually opened for the first youth to come in to realize and access those services. And here we are.
It really grew from there, didn't it?
It did. We opened in Abbotsford next a home for youth staffed by house parents, and a semi-independent supportive housing for youth in a family setting. We have a couple of college students who live on site whose role is really be the older sibling in a family group. And they're there to mentor the youth and to display appropriate behavior and to partake in the chores and to encourage the other youth to partake in house chores. And the goal is to be able to set these youth off successfully to live independently in the community. And then right after that, we opened in Chilliwack at the request of the community, and the same services that we do here. And then in 2020, we started talking with BC Housing and the city of Chilliwack about supportive housing for youth. And we were able to open up a 22 unit facility, apartment building for youth that's has 24-hour support on site, so it's staffed 24/7. We bring in a lot of community supports. We've been able to access counseling services on site, different medical services, and then support out in the community with these youth. And they could live there for up to 2 years. And the whole idea is to prepare them for successful independence, again, out in the community. And now we're been called into Alberta, and we're looking right now in the Edmonton region and working with some people there and speaking with some churches and opening up a location in Alberta. In fact, that's where I am right now.
Right, it's wonderful, the work that you've been doing. I've had a chance to see that work firsthand, and I've always been impressed with the passion that you have for this work, and the passion you have really for this work is a part of the story that led to it, and your own experience. I think that there's a lot of us who don't know what it's like to not have a home to go to, that don't have food or clothing or a place to wash, and how important these sorts of things are, particularly to the life of a young person. Now, Les, I think this is a good place for us to, I mean, we could talk about Cyrus Centre.
I can talk about it for days.
Exactly. And it is wonderful, but we want to talk about your story that leads us back to Cyrus Centre and the work that it does and why you are so passionate about that work. Now, I will say, for those of you who are watching this, Les does not have a Bono complex. He, in fact, was in a car accident that has impaired his audio and visual processing, and so bright lights can cause you to become, what would you say, dizzy?
Dizzy or overstimulated. Yeah.
Okay. So if you're wondering why he's got
Not
sunglasses,
Yeah.
that is why. But let's start telling your story. I know you've thought a lot about this, you've prayed a lot about this, and I know that there's a lot of pain here. But let's begin by talking about this, and really not necessarily that we're trying to highlight the pain, but actually the healing that came and that inspires you to help others to heal. Where would you say your story begins? Where would you start the story, Les?
Well, actually, what I want to say even before that, Cyrus Centre, when we talked about Cyrus Centre, where it is, began before I was even born. God had a plan for Cyrus Centre. And things that happened to me, which I will talk about in just a sec here, weren't created by God, but was created by the enemy. And evil things that happened weren't from God, because God doesn't create evil, but he was able to use what happened to me for good and for my role that was destined for with Cyrus Centre. So I guess my story starts right at the beginning, and when I was just a toddler. I mean, my parents were immigrants from Northern Europe, and I was in my first foster home.
Where was this, Canada, and where in Canada were you born?
BC.
BC.
Yeah, I was born in Vancouver.
Okay.
And early on, I was in a foster home when I was a toddler. I have no recollection of the foster home. I only know the stories that my sister told. My sister was there as well. We were there apparently because my mother was ill, and I was told that was because of tuberculosis. And so my sister, who was 8 years older than me, we were in this foster home, and what I know of it is from what my sister told me was, for instance, how the other kids, the children of the foster parents would treat us. And I would be tied to a tree in the yard, so I couldn't, leave the yard while the other kids would be out playing, and that the other kids would taunt me and tease me, and just apparently, I'd be there crying as I was tied to a tree. And my sister was the one that always tried to keep me safe while we were there. We were in the foster home for a year or thereabouts, and we were returned home. And when we returned home, I didn't remember or know my mom. And so,
About what age were you when you got returned home?
about 3. And so that I do remember. I remember being afraid or timid of her because I didn't know. And then one day there was a bang or a noise or something that scared me, and I literally jumped to my mom's arms, and that was sort of I guess when
Kind of reconnecting?
Connected us as
Yeah.
Mother and son. The next few years after that were typical family life, nothing really out of the ordinary. And then I don't know what happened, but something changed. The man who I thought was my dad, who I found out later wasn't, became very violent, and violence became the norm in the home. Originally, the violence was just taken out on our mom, and no one ever said anything. You know, you didn't talk to anybody about anything that happened. My mom didn't talk to anybody. I remember police coming to our door, and I can remember police officers saying, well, if you weren't so hysterical, you know, maybe nothing would happen. So there was never any safety net.
About how old were you at this time?
5.
5.
And at that time, the first time that I was ever struck was when I was 5. And
what were you thinking when that happened?
Well, at the time, I was terrified because my mom said, "Don't open the door. Do not let him in." He was at the door, pounding, yelling, screaming, threatening, cursing. And I was sitting on the edge of the couch, terrified. And my mom was hiding in the bedroom. And all of a sudden, he kicked the door in, and he came in. The first person he saw was me. And he started swearing at me, calling me a little piece of bleep, bleep, and then hit me so hard that I flew off the couch into the wall. And what I remember about hitting the wall is that I seen these little strips in the wall, and never seen what was behind the wall before. You know, it was back in the day when it was plaster of Paris on a...
So you actually went into the wall?
I went into the wall, yeah. And he proceeded to go beat my mom, and he beat her severely. And he left, and she was just on the floor, you know, somewhat conscious, and I was there with her, terrified. My sister came home from school, and first thing she sees is that the door has been kicked in, and comes running in. And I'm sobbing over my mom, and I can remember my sister reaching out to pick me up. And she took me into another room and, you know, assured me everything was going to be okay. And then she went and tended to our mother. Wasn't long after that. You know, beatings and yellings were so frequent that they were actually, it was more normal to have yelling, screaming, and my mother being struck than it was to have normal family time. And one day he had been freaking out on my mom. He had been beating her, and he told my sister, "This is what happens if you're gonna go against what I say." And he took her to the doorway, took the door, and he slammed it on her arm and snapped her arm in front of us, and then again left. It was a terrifying time as a child to grow up.
There must have just been fear. Just
anytime he was in the room and spoke, even if he spoke, you know, quietly and gently and stuff, there was always a fear of what's going to happen.
Well, I remember one time. I remember you told me that one time you spoke at the table, and you weren't sure about what happened when you just speaking.
So we're probably around 8 at the time, or I was 8, and my sister and I we all were at the dinner table, and by this time I had a little brother. My brother would have been a toddler at that point. We were at the dinner table, and I can remember that supper was soup. And it was like a cream of celery soup or whatever. And I can remember the bowls looked like they were not deep bowls. They were wide, shallow kind of bowls. And there was a jug of milk on the table, which was, back in the day, was a carton, you know, big square carton. And we're having supper, and my sister sitting beside me, and I have no idea what we spoke about, but we're just talking. And all of a sudden he got up from the table and casually walked around the table, came up from behind us, grabbed us by the head, and then yelled at us about talking at the table. And he held our faces in our soup. And our mother is like screaming at him to stop. "What are you doing?" And he then took the whole table and flipped the table upside down, everything flying. And he grabbed our mother and he threw her to the floor and ordered her to clean it up. And when she was done cleaning it up, he dragged her into the basement and beat her with an axe handle. And again, left. He wasn't a father figure. He was a monster.
I remember you saying too that she lost teeth in that.
She ended up losing all her teeth. What teeth she had left after that were removed. But again, nothing happened. There was no action. There was no one coming to the house to see if we're okay or what's going on.
I could only imagine the sense of hopelessness that you would feel? Because I know one thing, you've brought this up before about not only about your story but about those that you've encountered with through Cyrus Centre is that this feeling that there's no one to call to, there's no one to appeal to for help. And if you don't feel like you can call out for help, there's no one, that cares, if you will.
Yeah.
It's just the hopelessness is even deeper.
That's right. And we were always told not to tell anybody. And you don't talk to people, you don't talk to strangers, you don't talk to anyone. There was this real fear held over us to not say anything. At that time, I was in Catholic school as well. And so I knew of God and I believed in God, but I didn't know God. Definitely didn't know that I could have a relationship with Christ or anything like that. But the beatings and the yelling was just so frequent. There was even a time I was playing in the backyard with a friend, and I was told not to climb the fence. And we're back there, and my friend and I were playing, and what do? We climbed the fence, and I fell off, and I landed on my arm, which ended up being a broken arm. And I was terrified to tell my parents because of what might happen to me or my mom, and so I was trying to hide it. And I remember my mom coming out, and she saw me sitting there on the stairs with my friend, and he told her. He goes, I think he broke his arm. And I was more afraid of what was going to happen now than anything to do about my arm. And I remember the man that was, who I thought was my dad, just yelling at me and screaming at me and saying, well, he's not going to the hospital. He's not, forget it. And eventually they did take me to the hospital, and I had a broken arm. I should have been able to run inside crying because I fell and hurt my arm, and instead I was trying to hide it because it wasn't safe for me to. Yeah,
instead of going to your parents for love, you, in fear, wanted to stay away.
What might happen?
Yeah. What happened? How did you find out that this wasn't your father?
So it happened a few years later. So the day before my 10th birthday, he left, and didn't know that was the last time we were ever going to see him. But he left, and when he had left at that time, my mom, she wasn't alive anymore. She existed.
Just a shell of a person.
Shell of a person, deep depression, and had become addicted to different pharmaceutical drugs. And back then things weren't linked by computer, so she had different doctors and was getting drugs from different doctors, which later became from different drug dealers. So when I was 10, she wasn't able to provide for my brother or myself. And just before he left, my sister had left. She left and went to the States, and she wasn't coming back. And I was so lost now because my sister was my protector, and that was the one constant good thing in my life. And now she was gone, and I really felt abandoned. But I also know that she had to escape for herself. So when I started looking after my brother, I would go door to door, singing Christmas carols to raise funds to get some food for my brother and I. I used to steal bottles off of people's back steps to go cash them in, clothes off clotheslines. So my brother and I.
So you really needed to become the parent in the house.
I did.
Yeah.
And everything we had, whether it was furniture, toys, a bike, was sold. And that money went into my mom's addiction. And we had nothing. Going to school, I was bullied because of maybe the clothes I was wearing, and also being hungry. Yeah. You're at school and hungry, and other kids would have a lunch and stuff, and they say, hey, can I have a bite, or could I? And they would tease you for that. And
You know, it's such an interesting thing for those who, aren't experiencing that it's, when they're coming to school, right, and they're seeing somebody that, has, old clothes on and they're dirty and they're hungry, to not appreciate what could be going on at home.
mhm,
And because that's one of the things that goes through my mind, as I hear you talking, Les, is always thinking, okay, am I really being thoughtful or caring about the people I'm encountering and what could potentially be going on at home behind the scenes sort of thing?
yeah, I mean, whether it's homeless adults or youth or whatever is going on, everybody has a story. Everybody has a story, and their story is different. Some people have similarities in their stories, but everyone has a story that's unique to them, just as they are a unique creation of God. So,
I guess that's true. I mean, on that hand, you could have people that might come with nice clothes on, but
absolutely.
their home could be just as broken.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, we see youth at Cyrus Centre who have a home, but maybe money that would be spent on food might be going to support their parents' own addictions, or utilities aren't being paid because money is going into addictions. And even now, with the increase in rents and the costs of food, there's parents not able to provide just because of the poverty level they're at with the inflation that we're dealing with. We see families living in cars and tents and wanting the best for their kids, but not able to provide because of the current situation that they may be living in.
And having talked with you on this, this issue is a lot bigger than many of us fully appreciate.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh, it's everywhere. You don't necessarily see kids pushing shopping carts or carrying a bag of bottles over their shoulder. They're wearing ripped jeans, and youth are buying ripped jeans, so they don't even necessarily look any different. And so they're easy to be the unseen, the hidden homeless in our cities and schools and in our communities.
Well, I hate to say this, but your story, which is already bad, takes an even worse turn.
It did. When I was 12, my sister had moved back, and which was exciting and great. And so I went to go see her one day. And just before I got to her place, someone intercepted me and had different plans. And I was brutally raped mere meters from my sister's home, and thought I was going to die. In fact, I was told I was going to die, not to say a word, don't yell, don't scream, don't anything, or I was going to die. And
This person is basically saying, I'm going to kill you if you say anything.
yeah,
How old were you at this time?
I was 12. I was 12 years old. And I remember an inside voice, which I totally believe was of God, that gave me the strength and the courage to yell out a name that was of someone that wasn't even there, but as if they were there. And that was enough to distract the person that I was able to escape. I left bloody and sore, and I remember running through different backyards and alleys and stuff so he couldn't find me or find where I lived. And I ran home, and again, no one to tell. There was nothing I could do. And I remember hiding in my bedroom and being terrified. And yeah, that was a time where I was sure I was going to die. And especially had I not called out. And I really believe that was God gave me that at that time to intervene. And
That must have been a serious low point.
it was, and it's something that I had kept buried deep within me for so many years. In fact, most of my the things that I went through, or my mother went through, I had kept buried it deep down inside of me.
From shame?
From shame, from not wanting to relive anything that had happened.
Would you say that's the lowest of the shame for you? Is this the part of the story you really don't want to talk about?
It was the hardest part of my story to talk about. And things didn't end there either.
Yeah.
I talked before, I stole off of people's back porches or bottles or things to provide for my brother and I. I also stole when I was 14 with some other youth for the thrill of it. And it was, for me, it was acceptance with some other youth, that the longing for some kind of belonging. And we stole. We actually we stole some beer bottles, or some beer from a brewery that was on strike. And we had climbed over the wall, and we didn't see anybody, but we were seen. And we came out, and the police were sitting out there waiting for us. And it was actually the day before my 14th birthday. And and that's when I actually found out about my real dad. We were taken into the police station, and the other two boys that were arrested, their parents came and got them, and my mom didn't have a phone, and they had no way of getting a hold of her, and they were going to take me to juvie. And I was terrified. Like, I did not want to go there. And I remember one of the other moms said, well, I do know where he lives and stuff. I'll take him home and let his mom know it. So she did. And I remember my mom was furious, and my sister came over, and there was this big argument that ensued, and my sister saying, well, I think it's time he knows who his real dad is. And I'm like, what? And my mom was furious. And they told me that this monster that had been in our life wasn't my dad, and told me who my real father was, and which then led them.
Was that positive or negative for you? Like, what kind of emotions were you feeling? So
then it was just, I felt anger, and I was confused. And then the argument changed from them being mad at me for being arrested, was now my mother was furious that I had been told. So they had a big fight. I remember going to court because I was charged, and the other two boys were there, and their parents were there with them, and I didn't have anyone with me. And the judge gave them 6 months probation, but gave me a year's probation because he was concerned, because there was no one there with me, that I didn't have the proper support. So I was punished twice as hard. And my mom continued to spiral downhill and start using illicit drugs. And I was sexually assaulted again when I was 14 as well. And again, no one was the wiser. And I was apprehended and brought into care when I was 15. And I was living in a group home, and when I was there, I was told I'd be there for 6 weeks. They'll, do an assessment, see how I'm doing. Yeah. And so when I was there for 6 weeks, I was on my best behavior. I did everything that they wanted me to do. Didn't miss a minute of school. I was the perfect teenager. And I remember we're all there having a meeting afterwards after 6 weeks, and they're all saying, and he's just responded so well. He's done so great while he's here, that we think we should keep him in care and continue. And I was mortified,
Because you're doing all this so you can get out.
so I can get out.
And now it's making them want to keep you longer.
So I, like the flip of a switch, I was going to do anything and everything to get kicked out. And it wasn't a positive experience. It caused me to breach probation. My probation kept getting extended. And I went to go see my mom, and I went to her house and walked in on her and her drug dealer. And he was kind of in her face, and they were arguing. And I got in between them and kind of pushed him back, and in no uncertain terms told him to stay away from my mom, and he proceeded to pull out a gun and pistol whip me. And I was down on the floor, and my mom proceeded to complete her drug transaction as I lay there on the floor bleeding. And it was
Is that a new low?
it was the lowest of lows that I felt. This was like, she had no concern for me whatsoever. She didn't care. And I ended up stealing a bunch of her drugs because I was going to end my life. Excuse me. And
You at this point, you're just ready to give up.
give it up. So I took the drugs, and
How old were you again?
15.
15.
And I locked myself in my mom's room. And she went to a neighbor that was living upstairs, and they ended up calling ambulance, and I was taken to the hospital, and at the hospital I was made to drink some horrible black liquid that they use to pump your stomach, and yeah, thankfully I didn't follow through with it, and that there was that prevention, but it was definitely a new low with my mom, because my mom after that also told me that you'll never amount to anything more than a ditch digger.
So did that kind of feel like the last safety net, the last bit of hope that maybe you felt was tethering you to this life had been snapped?
Yeah, absolutely. I was when I turned 17, my probation ended, and I was determined to complete my probation without getting into any kind of trouble. I didn't want to go to jail. Like, I didn't want to go into real jail. Was in juvie a few times for, breach of probation.
So at this time, you have been in juvie, but you don't want to go back. So, because I think it's interesting, because the question that I would want to ask is, what are you looking forward to in life? Like, what kind of hope do you have? And it seems like the most hope that you have is just not to go to jail.
And that was, I did not want to go to adult jail. And I wanted to complete my probation. I didn't want to end up in adult jail because I was afraid that what would happen to me in there. I just ended up all over the place, really. Like, I didn't have a home of my own at the time. I couch surfed and slept at different places, found a cheap rental.
More or less homeless at this point.
Yeah, homeless in that, not even anyone to turn to. Like my sister.
And is this in Vancouver?
In
where
Vancouver.
This is happening?
Yeah, it's all took place in East Vancouver.
Okay.
When I was 19, I got a job in a bar, and I was hired as a bouncer. And so I started working in the bar, which opened me up to a whole lot of other things. And the lifestyle then turned into a lifestyle of party, and it was an opportunity to escape. You drank, you did drugs, and you went back to work. And you repeat the cycle. After work, it would be party until the wee hours of the morning. And this continued until the day I met my wife.
Let me ask you a question about this. Given that you had grown up in such a broken home and that there was so much anger and fighting, did you struggle with anger? Did you struggle?
I was a yeller. Yeah,
Yeah.
I was really someone who yelled a lot. I got into fights, um, but I got out of more fights because I would intimidate the other person through the escalation. I could take it with my
My
voice.
anger.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and again, even through all this time, I still believed in God, and I prayed every night. But I prayed a habitual prayer every night. It wasn't a prayer of faith or anything. It was just I prayed the same prayer night after night after night because I felt if I didn't, I would jinx myself or something bad would happen. That was where
So
that,
God was kind of like a good luck
yeah,
charm sort of idea.
yeah, yeah. And then one day, it was actually my wife's 19th birthday. She came in with her friends into this bar that I was working at to celebrate her birthday, and I asked her for ID, all of them at the door for their ID, and she was excited to show her ID because she's 19. And that was the first time we met.
Which I should say for any American listeners, it's
Yeah.
21 in the US, but it's 19 in Canada to
Yeah.
drink alcohol.
Yeah, 18 in Alberta. So we knew each other, and then a few months later, her and her girlfriend and my friend and I, we went out on a date, the four of us, and we had a great time. We went to a Western club of all places, and we ended up going. It was winter. Went tobogganing in Stanley Park. Not a great place to go tobogganing, but we found a creek bed, and it looked like a little slalom run. And we went tobogganing, and my friend wiped out, and I said, "I'll show you how it's done, because I'm going to show off in front of these two girls." And I hit the same bump he did, except when I wiped out, the toboggan went straight up the air, came back down on the bridge of my nose, and broke my nose, and off to our first date ends up in the emergency downtown St. Paul's. But it didn't scare her off, thankfully. And we went out again shortly thereafter, just the two of us. And because there was something so different about her. There was something so intriguing. Although she came there to party on her 19th birthday, she wasn't a party girl. You know, she went out on a date with me, but she wasn't a party girl. And she had these amazing standards and morals, and it was so intriguing and so attracting that, you know, we dated for a while, and it was like all of a sudden my things I was involved in, it was like wasn't important to me anymore, and I didn't need it. I all of a sudden had someone that loved me for me, not because they could get something from me or anything like that. In fact, I had nothing really, because she was the one that had a car, and she was the one that had a good job, but we ended up getting married. So a year and a half later, we had our first child a year after that. And, you know, we have three amazing children and 6 amazing grandchildren. But then my life didn't stop. I thought there was still something missing. And I walked out of our marriage.
How long had you been married?
So we were probably would have been married about 10 years at the time. Yeah, 10 years.
And you felt like there was something missing?
Yeah, it was like, I didn't even have a reason. I just told her I don't want to be married anymore. And she was, you know, we hadn't been fighting, nothing had been going on. And of course it made no sense to her. And I didn't even know what it was that was going on. And I literally walked out of our house and I don't want to be married anymore. And I walked away. And I stayed away for 3 weeks. And, you know, she kept trying to reach out to me and like, what's going on? We need to talk. And I couldn't talk to her because I didn't know what was going on. And I couldn't tell her. And I ended up praying about it. And it was just like, what am I doing? Like, I was praying and I was like, how am I praying? It wasn't my habitual prayer. It wasn't. And I called her up and I said, we need to talk. And we did, and we went to some counseling, and we were thankfully able to save our marriage, and now we've been married for over 40 years.
Wow.
And it was shortly thereafter that I came to the Lord, and it started in the workplace. I'm working with the same population I'm working with now, through a secular agency, and
So you were working with homeless youth?
Homeless youth and adults at the time,
okay.
yeah. And our place I worked at was going through some big changes, and part of it, there was some stuff that was happening that wasn't ethical. And one of the staff came to me, and she said, I don't believe our boss. She says, but I believe you. And she says, you tell me that these changes were always part of the plan, and I can accept it. But I can't accept the other person giving her the answer. And I looked her straight in the eye, and I lied to her. And I told her, yeah, it was part of the plan. And I went home, and I was so sick to my stomach. This person trusted me so much. And I remember them looking me straight in my eye and willing to take my word as the truth. And yeah, that night I cried out to God in a way I've never, ever had before. And I told God, I can't do this. I can't do this by myself. I need you. I need you to help me. And that night, it was like our whole room went bright, and that a lightning bolt went through me. It was just the most incredible experience I'd ever felt in my life. And I felt the presence of God, and I just felt this difference, this lightness that had come upon me. And I went to work the next morning, and there was a fellow there that I worked with, a Christian guy, and I told him what had happened. And he said to me, he says, I believe you were met by the Holy Spirit. And he says, have you ever prayed to accept Christ? And I said, no, I haven't. And we did right there and then. And he goes, oh, you got to come and tell Ruth. And Ruth was our admin assistant. And he says, you got to tell her. And we went over to Ruth, and we told her, and she starts weeping. And she says, I've been praying and praying for you for the last year. And she says, I bought you something that I've been wanting to give you, but wait for the right time. And she opens up her drawer, and there was this package, and it was wrapped in plain brown wrapper with a raffia bow on it, and had my name written on the package. And I opened it up, and it was my first Bible.
Wow.
And everything changed at that moment. I mean, I remember my boss coming into work, and he was talking to me a bit about what was going on. I said, I can't lie for you anymore. And he goes, oh, please. He says, don't tell me you become one of them born-again Christians. I said, actually, I have. And he was livid. He yelled and he screamed and slammed doors. He was so angry. And I felt so light and so good. And I just wanted to know everything possible about Jesus, and to walk with him, and to learn how to walk with him. And
would you say, Les, hearing your story and just hearing you go from just every string of hope that had been snapped in your life, it almost seems like hearing you talk about this, it was like for the first time you've been like reconnected to hope again.
Absolutely. It was such an incredible journey to see how life changed for me. And I've come to a point where I realized that everything that happened to me, I used to say, yeah, God used that, or God did that to help me prepare for this. Well, God doesn't create evil. God doesn't make you go through evil experiences. And that's the work of the enemy. That's the work of Satan. However, God can use evil for his good. Like he can take something from the pain and the suffering that I went through and use it for good and to prepare me for
He can make something beautiful out of something broken.
absolutely.
So Les, you have now, placed your trust in Jesus. You've placed your hope in Jesus, and your life is really being transformed. I'm curious to see or to know, how did you tell your wife about that, and what kind of impact did that have on you and your wife?
So when I accepted the Lord, and I came home and I actually told my wife, and at that point, everyone always thought my wife was a Christian. I mean, she's this good, moralistic, just such a giving person. And I remember when I told her, she said to me, her first words out of me, she goes, "Well, what's that mean? Isn't that something we should have talked about first?" And it was, and that's what we do. We laugh about that. And so she's her first thoughts that she told me afterwards were, "Oh, this is a fad. Yeah, this is a fad. He's gonna not, 2 weeks down the road, he's gonna be onto something else." But I wasn't, and things in my personal life changed. I didn't realize how much I swore. I completely stopped swearing without even, not because I was putting effort into it. It stopped. And it was actually here at Northview where I heard someone being baptized, and someone that I knew. And part of his testimony was, I really knew that Jesus was real when I saw Les no longer swearing.
Wow.
So that's how much, I had no idea. And then,
What church were you going to, by the way, at this time, when you came to faith?
so when I came to faith, my first church actually was Seven Oaks Alliance.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So at that time, you were living here in Abbotsford?
Yep. Living here in Abbotsford. And
Now, when you came to faith, I'm guessing that this became the seed of Cyrus Centre. Like, where did Cyrus Centre come in the midst of this story?
so it right near the beginning, all of a sudden I started writing a plan of a Christ-centered service for youth. And I wrote this plan and thought I had crossed all my T's and dotted all my I's, and I had this ministry plan moving forward. And I remember sharing it with Pastor at Seven Oaks. And he read it and he says, "This looks great." He says, "Abbotsford's not ready for it, and neither are you." And I thought, what the heck's he talking about? I was really taken aback, and it's like, I'm not ready for it. Well, he was so right. And with the words of wisdom that he spoke at the time, I had a lot of growing in my faith to do. And I had needed to learn about ministry as well. And so I actually got involved with a Christian organization and was working in ministry and learned all the ins and outs and the difficulties of raising support and making something like that happen when you don't have the government support. Previously where I worked, it was all government funded, and it was easy.
I can only imagine what's going on too with your wife. So I'm guessing that your wife came to faith over time.
Yeah,
as you guys went to church.
And our children, and actually my son was actually the first one in our family to come to faith. But
well, then what is she thinking now that you're like wanting to go into this ministry?
She was terrified, especially because I had to raise my support.
Right.
And she was like, "What are we going to do?" And we actually went into quite a bit of debt.
So you personally, you put a lot into this.
Yeah, as far as going into ministry before Cyrus Centre,
Okay.
before we opened it. And then, but I realized that I could raise the support. It was one thing to raise the support for myself, but it was another thing to raise support for a ministry. And we talked about it, we definitely prayed about it, we sought out wisdom of different pastors and friends, and we had started a steering group here in the community that included different pastors and people from different organizations. And someone donated $10,000, and the group says, we think you should get the ball rolling and make this happen. And so they said, this is how much we'll pay you. And so they said they would pay me. So can you pay me for 3 months? And we literally stepped out in faith. And soon as we stepped out in faith and actually took risk, God flung the doors wide open. He didn't just open it a little crack so we could see what might be possible. He flung it wide open, and
I remember somebody once saying to me that God's love language is faith. And I think there's a lot of truth to that.
Absolutely.
Because with running Apologetics Canada, I have encountered the exact same thing. Yeah. God really does want you to take those steps of faith where you're following, where you're trusting, and God provides. Now you're about to say something as you were heading into this, and God's providing.
So God has provided all along the way, the big things, the little things, and I'd love to share a story of just showing you how these little things work. So we've never, by the way, never been short money to pay a bill. We've never been short to pay staff, to meet our obligations. God has provided all along the way. We had a young...
In what year did you start at Cyrus Centre?
2004. So we've been running for 18 years now. And in 2007, we're in a new building that we're in right now. And we had this girl there. She is fairly new for us. She'd been on the streets, sexually exploited, heavy drug use, homeless. So she's with us, and I'm explaining to her where the coffee was. She wanted a coffee, and I showed her the coffee bar. And she's pouring the coffee, and she's looking, she says, I don't want coffee, mate. She says, don't you guys have any milk or cream? I said, no, sorry, we don't. I said, it's not in our budget for it. We have coffee, mate. And she goes, well, you're a bunch of Christians here. Why don't you pray for it? And I thought, oh yeah, I'll show you. I said, yeah, well, okay, we will. I said, come here. And I called up 2 other staff. We joined hands, and I prayed for milk. I wasn't praying out of faith. I wasn't praying because I thought now milk's going to come to us. But I got this teenagers challenging me, so let's pray. So I pray, and no sooner did I finish praying, and in Jesus' name, amen, that the front door opens, and this lady walks in, and she's got 4 jugs of milk. And she goes, excuse me, she says, I was just wondering if you guys could use some milk. This teenage girl, she starts screaming hysterically, like she's just freaking out. I all of a sudden have tears coming down my face, and this lady starts apologizing. She says, oh, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to do anything. And we tell her what happens. She starts crying, and she was new to the community, and she'd come to Northview, and she was in some women's group and talking about how she wanted to get involved in the community, and someone told her about Cyrus Centre. So she thought, kids like milk, I'll bring some milk. And God honored that prayer, even though it wasn't a prayer of faith, because he also wanted to show me, I take care of the little things. The little things are just as important to me as are the big things, keeping a roof over our head, right? You need to trust me. You need to trust me. And what's really, really unique about the story, we have milk delivered every Monday since then. Wow. We have not had a shortage of milk. There's been milk for coffee or cereal or whatever ever since then in 2007, and it continues at our Chilliwack Center as well. We have milk. And
there's so many, rabbit trails I would love to run down with you on all of this, Les. But one that I think would be just important for us to tie into this is your story and how it's led, to Cyrus Centre. And I'm guessing from hearing your story that Cyrus Centre really was a facility that you wish as a young person
absolutely
that you had.
I want a place where youth will be fed,
that has milk.
that has milk, that they're going to receive nutrition without any questions. We feed them because they're hungry. We're going to provide them shelter because they need shelter, clothing because they need clothing, and love and support because that's what they need. We're a ministry of just being there. We're there 24/7, 365 days of the year. We operate from a place of grace in that youth may try to burn bridges or have behaviors that might get them kicked out of other places. And we're going to continue to show them grace as long as it's not putting anyone safety at risk. We want these youth to have every chance that they can receive to have success and support and to know Jesus. And if that means letting them back in after some inappropriate behaviors or not following an expectation, we're going to do so. And
because really what I hear you saying is, you want to introduce these youth to hope,
absolutely.
right? And that they're that they don't need to give up on life, and that there is one who truly does love them, and this is, I think, beautiful part of your story, which is a part of a much bigger story, the story of the church, about people whose lives have been changed by Jesus, and that we have the privilege of being the change we wish we had.
Yeah. We have seen so many youth, coming to the Lord, being baptized. Certain youth, we now have youth who at one time were receiving our services who now work for us. Youth who've gone on to get married, go on to get a degree in social work, become homeowners, and we've seen tragedies as well, with the opiate crisis, and which is just so heartbreaking.
Yeah.
But so many, even of those youth, we've had the opportunity to speak Jesus into their lives, and yeah, it's an incredible ministry to be a part of, because I get to see the other staff who are ministering to these kids the way I'd want to be ministered to, and they're giving of themselves, and it's
Listen, I hope that as people have heard your story, which, by the way, thank you for sharing it, because I hope that they see that what started in such darkness and such brokenness, as we've talked and we've come now back full circle to Cyrus Centre, so much hope and beauty and potential for restoration and reconciliation, and that this really is not just your story, this is the Christian story. This is a story that we can all have in Christ.
absolutely.
And I hope it encourages people. So thank you for sharing, and I pray that it encourages people. If people want to know more about Cyrus Centre, where do they go?
They can go to our website, cyruscentre.com. They can visit one of our centers. We're always happy to give people a tour. There's different events that we do throughout the year, like one coming up end of February, the coldest night of the year, which is a walk to help raise funds and awareness.
Which my family has been a part of. It is
Awesome.
Yeah, it's a good way. I think sometimes we don't like to walk our neighborhoods. Sometimes we don't like to look at what's going on, and I think wherever you are right now, there is homelessness going on.
Oh yeah.
It's an epidemic. But not just feeling despair, but what I really appreciated with Cyrus Centre and walking our own community was that there's hope, and that we can see change, and that we can be a light and help in our own community. Well, thank you, Les, for joining me. Really appreciate you sharing your story, and I just pray that Cyrus Centre will continue to be a light, not only here in British Columbia and various cities, but seeing it be a resource across Canada, particularly right now as you guys are in Alberta.
Thank you. And I look forward to sharing more highlights as they happen.